I never imagined betrayal could hide in something so small, a plain silver tube, rolling around on the passenger seat like it owned the car. It was early morning, sunlight slanting through the windshield, and I'd only come to grab my husband's jacket before he left for work. Morning light spilled across the kitchen tiles, catching on the dust I hadn't noticed before. It's strange how, once your heart breaks, your eyes start seeing everything, every flaw, every lie, every silent space that used to feel safe. I stirred my coffee until it went cold, watching the swirl of cream disappear like my old sense of peace. Julian came downstairs humming, his tie crooked, his phone already in hand. He looked the same, clean-shaven, composed, but now I noticed how he smiled for the mirror, not for me. "Big day," he said, grabbing his keys. "Lunch meeting with clients." Clients. That word hit differently now. As the door shut behind him, I caught my reflection in the window. For a second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Eyes rimmed with sleeplessness, hair in a lazy bun, face both fragile and furious. That woman wasn't me. She was someone waiting to wake up. At the bakery, the smell of vanilla and yeast usually soothed me. But even there, peace felt foreign. I burned 2 trays of croissants because I was too busy replaying his words in my mind. My assistant, Emily, tried to make me laugh. "Maybe you need a vacation," she said gently. I smiled, but my heart wasn't listening. Later that afternoon, as I was closing shop, my best friend Mara stopped by. One look at my face and she knew. She always did. "What happened?" she asked softly. I told her about the tube, the lie, the shrug. Her jaw tightened. "You think it's Allison," she whispered. "Allison, my son's wife. Beautiful, ambitious, always too affectionate with Julian." I used to ignore the tiny gestures, the hand on his arm, the shared glances during family dinners. I told myself I was imagining it, because who would want to believe something that ugly could bloom so close to home? Mara's silence was answer enough. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom, the same one Julian and I had chosen together years ago. I ran my fingers along the glass, tracing the reflection of my wedding photo behind me. There, between the lines on my face and the empty space beside me, I saw them clearly, the cracks in the mirror that had been forming long before that tube appeared. And I knew, the truth had only just begun to show itself. The days that followed felt like walking through fog. Everything looked normal, but nothing was. Julian still kissed my forehead before leaving for meetings, still texted me good night with heart emojis, still played the devoted husband for anyone watching. But behind those messages, I could almost feel the static of deception humming. I started paying attention. Not like a paranoid wife, like a woman sharpening her senses after years of being blindfolded. His phone was always locked now. The passcode had changed. The way he smiled when it buzzed told me those notifications weren't about clients. At first, I told myself I didn't want proof. Proof meant the end of everything, the bakery we built, the family we raised, the years that had waited. But curiosity is cruel when it's mixed with pain. One night, when he fell asleep on the couch, I took his phone. My hands trembled so badly that I almost dropped it. Of course, it was locked. But on the black screen, I saw one name flash with a new message. Allison Kissmark. I froze. The room spun. My son's wife. My own daughter-in-law. I wanted to scream, to throw the phone, to tear the world in half. But instead, I placed it gently back on the table. If I exploded too soon, he'd cover his tracks. I needed clarity, not chaos. The next morning, I called a private investigator, Thomas Ray, recommended by Mara's cousin. His voice was calm, steady, almost kind. "Mrs. Harlow, if you suspect something, let's confirm it properly," he said. His professionalism steadied me. For a week, I went through the motions, baking pastries, smiling at customers, pretending to sleep beside a man whose every breath now sounded like a lie. Thomas sent me updates, blurred photos, timestamps, hotel receipts. Each message hit like a hammer, flattening any hope I'd had left. Then, one evening, a video arrived. Grainy, distant, but unmistakable. Julian and Allison entering a small motel room. His hand on her back. Her laugh. Light. Careless. Cruel. I sat at the kitchen table until the sun rose, staring at the flickering screen, letting every illusion burn away. By dawn, I wasn't the same woman anymore. The fog had lifted. All that remained was cold, blinding truth. And the beginning of a plan I never thought I'd make. When the truth finally sank in, it didn't explode. It settled like dust after a storm, coating everything I loved in silence. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories that refused to die. Every corner whispered their laughter, every photo frame stared back with accusation. That morning, I sat in the kitchen with Thomas's envelope on the table. The photos, the receipts, the undeniable proof. I had asked for clarity, but holding it felt like holding shards of glass. Each picture cut deeper than the last. Julian's arm around Allison, the way she tilted her head toward him. So familiar, so intimate. My son's wife. My husband. Together. I pressed my palms to my eyes, but the images burned through anyway. How do you mourn two betrayals at once? One from the man who vowed to love you, and another from the woman you treated like a daughter? When Julian came home that evening, he smelled like her perfume, light and floral, the same scent she wore to family dinners. I almost laughed. He didn't even bother hiding it anymore. "Rough day?" he asked, loosening his tie. I looked at him, really looked, and felt something shift inside me. Not rage. Not even heartbreak. Just a hollow calm. "You could say that," I whispered. He kissed my forehead, his lips cold, his eyes darting toward the counter where the envelope lay, half hidden beneath a stack of bills. For a fleeting second, I saw fear flicker there. Maybe he sensed it. Maybe guilt has a smell too. After he went upstairs, I poured myself a glass of wine and turned on the oven. The hum of it filled the quiet. I baked aimlessly, cinnamon rolls, I think, but they came out burned and bitter, just like me. When the clock struck midnight, I took the envelope, walked to the backyard, and fed every piece of evidence into the fire pit. Flames licked the night air, greedy and bright. Proof wasn't what I needed anymore. Justice was. As the last photo curled into ash, I made myself a silent promise. If they thought they could humiliate me in secret, I'd make the truth unforgettable. Not with violence, but with exposure. They had broken my heart. Now I'd break their illusion. For days after burning the photos, I lived inside a strange quiet. The bakery ran, customers came and went, and Julian carried on his perfect performance. But inside me, something had changed, a storm gathering beneath polite smiles. I was done being the quiet woman who baked bread while her world crumbled. At night, I replayed their betrayal in my mind like a film I couldn't turn off. Each scene ended with the same question. How do I make them feel what I felt? Not for a moment, for good. That question kept me awake, pacing the dark kitchen while the clock ticked like a metronome for my fury. Then one evening, as I was cleaning the counter, my hand brushed over the old box of labels we used for packaging. "Homemade with love," they read, a message I once believed in. I peeled one off, stared at it, and laughed softly to myself. Love. What a cruel little word. That's when the idea came. Sudden, wild, and wrong. Even as it formed, I knew I shouldn't follow it. But betrayal does something to the brain. It bends reason into revenge. I didn't want to hurt them physically. I wanted to humiliate them symbolically, the same way they'd stripped me of my dignity. I started thinking less like a victim, more like an architect. Every small plan I made wasn't about violence. It was about exposure. How could I make the truth visible to everyone they deceived? How could I make sure the world saw the mess behind their perfect faces? When I told Mara a hint of what I was planning, her eyes widened. "Juliet, be careful. Don't cross a line you can't come back from." I smiled, tired but certain. The line disappeared when they crossed me. Still, her warning echoed in my head long after she left. Late that night, I stood in front of the mirror again. My reflection didn't look angry anymore. It looked deliberate. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken. She was calculating. "I won't destroy them," I whispered to the empty room. "They'll destroy themselves. I'll just let everyone watch." And in that whisper, the plan that shouldn't exist began to take shape. Fragile, dangerous, and unstoppable. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but planning it felt like reheating a lifetime of small betrayals until they sizzled. Once the decision settled in my bones, I began to arrange the edges of the plan like a seamstress prepping fabric. Neat, precise, impossible to see until the final stitch. I didn't want spectacle for spectacle's sake. I wanted inevitability, a night where truth would step forward of its own accord and everyone who mattered would be watching. So I started with the ordinary things, predictable routines, the family calendar, the tiny habits that make people easy to find. I listened to Julian's schedule like it was a radio I'd finally learned to tune. I watched Allison's social posts for patterns. I learned where they met and how they slipped into each other's lives between work meetings and PTA nights. Preparation was surprisingly intimate. I learned their favorite coffee, the route they took on Sunday mornings, the way Julian always left his cufflink on the dresser for good luck before a meeting. Each small detail was a thread I could tug without forcing the knot. I felt more alive with every observation. Observing felt like reclaiming power. Still, there were moments of doubt. Standing in the bakery at dawn while kneading dough, I would feel my hands remember who I had been before every suspicion, a woman whose life revolved around ovens and orders and the soft faces of regulars. The idea of turning my life into a stage for humiliation made my stomach drop. What if I became the thing I hated most? What if, in trying to expose their lie, I created pain I couldn't control? Mara's words came back to me more than once. Asterisk, don't cross a line you can't come back from. Asterisk, I tried to imagine the line as a ribbon tied across a doorway. With every plan I made, my hands hovered over the scissors. I promised myself I would not cut anyone's body, only their cover. No cruelty that would harm, only exposure that would peel away the masks. On the night I chose, the air was mossy with late summer humidity. I set the table, not for guests but for truth. Lights left slightly on, the front garden watered so footprints would show, candles in a safe corner to make the room glow rather than grow dark. I wore an old dress Julian loved, not because I wanted to seduce him back but because I wanted him to recognize, in public, the woman he had taken for granted. When I locked the front door and sat in the living room with the kettle whispering on the stove, my pulse drummed steady and slow. I was ready. Not for violence, not for blood, for exposure, for watching illusions unravel in daylight. The night had teeth. I only had to let it bite. The night arrived draped in silence, the kind that hums with secrets. I had prepared everything, not a weapon, not a threat, just a stage. Candles flickered softly, their glow sliding across the glass cabinets and photos of happier years. The house smelled of cinnamon and something sharper, truth waiting to be tasted. Julian thought I was visiting Mara that evening. Allison must have believed the same. It was almost poetic. They would meet in the home I'd built, beneath the roof where I'd prayed, laughed, and loved. Their favorite hiding place would become their unveiling. From my car parked down the street, I watched them slip through the gate. Careful, hurried. He still carried that air of confidence, the same swagger that once made me feel protected. Now, it only made me feel tired. She followed behind, giggling, the sound like glass scraping against metal. I waited a moment before stepping out. Every heartbeat felt like thunder in my chest, but my face was calm. I'd rehearsed this too many times to falter. When I opened the front door, their laughter died mid-echo. They froze. Julian's shirt half-buttoned, Allison clutching her purse like a shield. "Don't stop on my account," I said quietly. "I only came to see what honesty looks like these days." No shouting, no crying, just silence, thick and suffocating. Allison's face flushed red, Julian's lips parted, searching for lies that no longer worked. I could see panic bloom in his eyes, the slow realization that everything he'd built, every polished word, every performance, was collapsing. Then came the noise, the front door banging open as our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, appeared with her phone. "Juliet! I saw lights. Oh my God!" Her voice carried down the street. Within minutes, others gathered outside, drawn by whispers and curiosity. And that was all it took. Their secret, once hidden behind motel doors and false smiles, was now exposed under the unforgiving light of community eyes. Julian tried to speak, but words failed. Allison fled toward the kitchen, tears streaking her makeup. Cameras flashed, neighbors recording, gossip blooming like wildfire. I didn't need to say another word. The world was already doing it for me. As the flashing red lights of fire trucks appeared in the distance, summoned by a panicked call from Mrs. Peterson, I stepped outside, letting the night swallow the chaos behind me. For the first time in months, the air felt clean. By morning, the entire neighborhood knew. You could feel it in the way curtains twitched and voices dropped when I passed by. What had happened in my house wasn't just a scandal. It was a wildfire that burned through every polite smile and suburban secret. The videos had already made their way online. A few seconds of chaos, Julian half-dressed, Allison screaming, neighbors shouting in the background. It didn't matter that I hadn't posted a thing. The internet doesn't need permission, it just needs spectacle. When I opened the bakery, customers arrived early, pretending to order pastries while fishing for details. "We saw the fire trucks," one whispered. "Is it true what they say?" I smiled, calm and unbothered. "You'll have to ask Julian," I said, sliding her change across the counter. By noon, the entire display case was empty. People love drama, but they love cinnamon rolls more, especially when they're buying them from the woman who stood her ground. Julian tried to call that night. I let it ring. He left a message, his voice cracked, begging me to talk privately. Privately. The same word he'd built his affair around. I deleted the voicemail without listening twice. Allison's family packed her things for my son's house the next day. He hadn't even known. When I told him, Daniel's face went pale, like the ground had fallen out from under him. He didn't speak much, just hugged me, his arms trembling. That hug hurt more than all of it combined. He didn't deserve any of this. None of us did. The media came next. Gossip blogs, podcasts, even a small local channel that called it The Glue Affair, a name both cruel and fitting. They wanted interviews, photos, a statement. I refused them all. Silence was my victory now. But late at night, when the bakery was dark and the street quiet, the weight of it all would find me again. I'd stand by the window, watching the glow of the streetlights, wondering how revenge could feel so full and empty at once. I'd won the spectacle, but the victory didn't taste sweet. It tasted like sugar burned too long. Sharp, bitter, impossible to swallow. Still, one truth remained. They could rebuild their lies, but they could never erase the night the world saw who they really were. The weeks after the scandal felt strangely quiet, like the world had exhaled and moved on while I was still learning how to breathe again. The bakery became my sanctuary. Every morning, I arrived before dawn, rolling dough and watching the sky shift from gray to gold. The rhythm of kneading, shaping, baking. It reminded me that creation was still possible after destruction. People came not just for pastries anymore, but for stories. Some offered sympathy, others curiosity disguised as concern. But most came with quiet admiration. "You're stronger than I'd be," one woman said softly, clutching a cup of coffee. I smiled, though I wasn't sure it was strength keeping me upright. Maybe it was simply the absence of fear. Julian's name still floated around in whispers, but he'd left town. Word was he'd tried to start over somewhere north, where people didn't know him. Allison vanished too, deleted her accounts, left her job, disappeared like a ghost embarrassed by daylight. For the first time in years, the house was mine. I repainted the living room, replaced the photos, filled the silence with music instead of waiting for footsteps that would never come. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was peace, slow and fragile, like a new plant pushing through ash. Daniel came by one evening, still quiet but healing in his own way. We didn't talk about them. We talked about the bakery, about his work, about how strange it felt to start over. Before leaving, he said, "Mom, you didn't just expose them. You reminded everyone that no lie survives forever." I held on to that. One afternoon, I received a letter from the city council. An invitation to speak at a local women's event about resilience and self-worth. At first, I laughed at the irony. But as I reread the letter, I realized maybe it wasn't irony. Maybe it was purpose. I didn't plan any grand speech. I just told the truth. That pain can destroy you or rebuild you, depending on how you hold it. When the applause came, It wasn't for revenge. It was for survival. And as I stood under the stage lights, I realized, fire hadn't just burned my old life down. It had cleared the ground for something new to grow. Months passed, and the scandal that once ruled every whisper faded into background noise. New gossip replaced my story. New faces carried new sins. That's the thing about public shame, it burns bright, then vanishes like smoke. But the quiet it leaves behind is where the real healing begins. I spent more time in the bakery than ever. Not to hide, but to create. I introduced new recipes: honey lavender bread, lemon tarts, strawberry glazed donuts. Sweet things, soft things. Each batch felt like therapy, a reminder that not all sticky things destroy, some hold life together. People still came in to talk. Some wanted advice, others just needed to sit in silence with someone who had walked through the same kind of fire. I never told them every detail. I just said, "You'll survive this. Maybe even thank it one day." Julian never returned. A few mutual friends said he'd tried reaching out, that he was living quietly in another town, jobless and alone. I didn't hate him anymore. Hate was too heavy to carry. I'd laid it down somewhere between forgiveness and indifference. As for Allison, rumor said she'd divorced my son officially and moved abroad. I didn't celebrate her downfall. I only hoped she'd learn something from the wreckage she helped create. Everyone pays a price for their lies, one way or another. One morning, I stood outside the bakery before opening, the sunrise painting gold across the windows. For the first time in years, I felt light. Truly light. No guilt. No need for revenge. Just gratitude for the peace that came after the storm. I thought about everything that had happened: the betrayal, the exposure, the chaos, the quiet after. It wasn't revenge that saved me. It was reclaiming myself, piece by piece. I had learned that sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about freedom. That night, I wrote a single line in my journal, the one I'd kept since the beginning. Glue can bind or break, and I finally learned which one I'm made of. Then I closed the book, turned off the lights, and let the scent of fresh bread fill the room. A symbol that some endings are really just beginnings, rising warm and whole from the ashes.